We had a panel discussion on media in flux, navigating the rapidly shifting landscape of paid, owned, earned channels. This is a big issue for me with my clients. We talked about the fact that these aren't managed by any one person, and if you get them working together, you can get an increased financial impact for media, 20 to 50%. So I'm very, very interested to hear what we have to say. Welcome to the stage, Matthew Lindenberg, Chief Marketing Officer from Carney Bank, Andrew Agnello, did I get that right? That's bad for an Italian. I should have done better. Digital Marketing at Chartis, and then Med, our friend Med Yakub, Marketing Director from Tradesk. We've met yesterday. So come on, head on up, and this is a great topic.
Thanks for having us today. Matt, Andrew, thanks for joining us. Unfortunately, Angela could not make it today. So Matt and Andrew are looking for you guys to do it. So AI is obviously fundamental. I think I was walking through breakfast and every single board had AI next to it. And I was like, oh, AI is not really the differentiator anymore since the latest buzzword. But as we look at everybody in the audience to discover and evaluate and trust the brands, the traditional past, owned, and earned medias, the ecosystem is trying to change, and how we're looking at people discovering it and realizing it. So we've got some topics here, identifying high potential earning channels, emerging channels, and I wanted to kind of talk about some of the talking points or what's accelerating decision-making changes, what creates the dark funnel, which Andrew kind of brought to the table of what the dark funnel is, and that is, I think we just talked about it in the earlier speaker where he's like, you're going to have that one-page view, and going from that, how people are consuming. So I want to kind of turn it over to you guys and talk about how you're discovering right now paid, owned, and earned media from that perspective. Matt, do you want to start with us?
Sure. If you listen to the various conversations we're having, I mean, AI is a topic of every conversation. The first conversation here today was ensuring that you're planning around artificial intelligence and creating content that's discoverable is the end all and be all. And then you hear that it's social and it's local. And I think the answer is yes. And we're here to talk about paid, owned, and earned. And yes, AI is absolutely changing the landscape. And yes, that creates challenges. And yes, there's some things that are hard to measure in there. There's the dark funnel. And yet, there's still so much more that we need to be doing, bringing it all together. I think as marketers, I joke around in the office and I say, sure, my title is Chief Marketing Officer, but I think really it ought to be Storyteller in Chief. I think that ultimately, the brand, when I put on my brand marketing hat, it's really about telling our story, educating in a way increasingly that people want to pull content from us rather than the content that traditionally we were able to push out. And doing that across channels. And if you do that right, of course, it'll be discoverable by the AI engines. It'll be shared and amplified across social media platforms. And so I think that's really a big piece of what we're doing is in a data-driven and measured way wherever we can, how do we use each of those channels as one brushstroke in the broader portrait of our story? And I think, ultimately, as we think about the traditional marketing funnel, a lot of that is still in place, and I've never actually believed it's the straight down funnel. I think there's a lot of spiraling that happens within it. But I think all of our channels, paid, owned, earned, work together, and ultimately create those brushstrokes in the broader portrait that allow people to learn about the business and ultimately get them to take action.
Well, thank you for that. Andrew, I think when you kind of highlighted that financial marketers these days means they have to compete not just for attention, but they have to compete for that space. I know your firm and Chartis that's your core offering. Can you talk to us and the marketers here what you guys are doing and how you're approaching that?
Certainly. So we work with a lot of financial brands as well as brands in other industries as well. And there's this common core with a lot of our clients where there are these high consideration decisions and purchases that they make. And as Matt was saying, wheeling a storyteller, I think, is really a good way to put it, because with AI, we're seeing that you can start to put that prompt in. And it's this new front door. We've had other new front doors in digital before, but this front door is very big. And it has a very large foyer, if you would say, as you go through it, where it can really pull you deep down into the funnel very quickly. And what we're seeing with our clients is when these prompt platforms start to suggest solutions in terms of products and providers, it is very hard to intersect and become part of that consideration set if you are not already part of it, unless the user is very unhappy with the results and is actually asks the LLM, okay, I want a different option for that. And so what we've been testing and seeing is that you really have to focus on the full funnel. Traditionally, we've been able to be a bit more selective where, you know what, it's very expensive, very crowded to compete top of funnel, but you really need to have that presence in the top of the funnel. And as you're thinking about your marketing campaigns and who your customer is, think about the story of what that life is in terms of, okay, what is a triggering point where maybe they start to have this challenge or they recognize that they may start to look for something and they start to look at those things within the LLMs and then they figure out, okay, maybe this is the type of financial product that I want and they start to go down that. You need to have content and something to say about it, and it needs to be something, of course, of meaning and value, not just some type of messaging that you broadcast just for advertising. And so you're really going to need to think about that full funnel, and outside of these LLMs, of course, we're seeing that the use of ChatGPT and Google's suite of LLMs continues to grow. And right now, they're not monetized. Eventually, they will be, because $20 a month for ChatGPT isn't going to do a return for the company. And so, but outside of that, until it is monetized, think about when you go through these platforms and you're putting your prompt in, you're conducting all of this research so quickly and in one place. And if you weren't doing it in an LLM, you would be going through so many pages of content, you would be scrolling through so many pages, and all of the media ads that would be triggered. That doesn't happen in these platforms. So even outside of these platforms where people maybe don't start their journey or they're doing research outside of it, the amount of media is going to be likely to shrink. And as a result, the price of that media is going to be more expensive. So I think that's going to influence some of our decisions that we're going to have to make in terms of how we plan our media dollars. Outside of the platforms, and then of course once they start to get monetized, how do we start to play in this very large funnel of prompts?
You know, you said a couple of things that really got my attention about creating value in the content you're creating at those decision-making points, and I think that's a really good point. Is marketing cannot, should not, will not live in a vacuum, right? I think marketing and client experience are fundamentally intertwined, and understanding what that journey is, and actually it's probably multiple journeys at multiple levels, understanding how those are working, mapping them out, and spending the time to really understand them in a research-based way is really important. This is getting a little bit away from the media conversation, but it comes back in that you talked about the big front door, but I think maybe there's a big front door, but it's, and you talked about less media. It's less media, but it's so much more fractured, right? And I think that makes understanding the client experience and the journey so much more important, because then you understand what are the micro moments of meaning along that journey, and then can deliver content across your channels at the right place to the right people that address those moments of meaning, and that's ultimately how you win.
It is certainly, and I like that you brought up the micro moments, because that also helps with prioritizing where to focus on visibility in these platforms, but also outside of it as well. Because I know, it can be very overwhelming in terms of, all right, everyone's searching these things, what are the prompts? You have the whole funnel, it's like that's a lot to go after, but right now it's early and you can test and there are tweaks you can make and you can see really quick results very quickly with some of the improvements that we're seeing with our clients. And so you could pick those micro moments where it's like, all right, even if this person's really far down in the funnel, if they're making this decision, let's make sure our product and our service is there and it's also shown in a way that is very positive as well.
Yeah, that's right. We heard a couple of sessions ago about call center volume being down 10%. But I think that's right on, is by doing exactly that, by conveying that content, by making it available through the LLMs and the Gen AI models. Yeah, you may be reducing some of the clicks, you may be reducing some of the calls, but when you get them, you've now established yourself as the subject matter expert and as the credible partner for whatever it is they're looking for. And so when you do get perhaps a reduced volume, the volume is reduced because some of that volume was around super high funnel, preliminary research, initial conversations, awareness, information gathering. Maybe that doesn't need to happen with a live conversation anymore, which is probably okay, because then when you have those conversations, they're far more engaged and they're far closer to the point of being ready to take action.
So I have a question for both of you guys right now. As AI is becoming the discovery or entry point, how do we refine top of funnel visibility when the funnel has gone dark, right? So we talked earlier about that. So Matt, if you want to kind of address it, how do we refine that top of funnel visibility since we cannot see it in analytics, we can't see it in anywhere else? How are you and your team kind of defining where that traffic is coming from and putting it into the funnel?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know it's one that everybody is struggling with. I want to take a step back and first of all just acknowledge, we had a preliminary kind of prep call, and the comment I made is if you look back at Jeff Bezos through the years, and all through the years, no matter when you heard him speaking, he would always say, today is day one for e-commerce. If you spoke with him today, he would tell you, today is day one for e-commerce. And I'll say, today is day one for AI, except it actually kind of really is. And so I think we need to be doing what we can. Of course, we can look. We can look at Google, at website analytics, look at traffic sources, look at where it's coming from. We should be doing all those things and optimizing our pages to try to capitalize on as much of that as possible. But if you're kind of thinking about this as connecting all the dots, maybe we need to give ourselves a little bit of grace, knowing that it's day one, and in connecting the dots, maybe we're only connecting dots 1, 2, and 3, and that's an okay start. I think start where we can, do a little bit better tomorrow, and so on and so on. And so I think measure what we can, design marketing efforts around additional measurement approaches in the future, always get a little bit better tomorrow, and then realize again, we love to veer back to AI, but remember that that's not the entire funnel, and we talk about the dark funnel, but only a part of it is dark. Right? There's still a lot that we can be doing across paid, owned, earned, across. I know we're here talking about a digital marketing event, but digital doesn't live in a vacuum either, right? You have your digital and your traditional media across paid, owned, earned, and those all need to work together to feed that top of the funnel, and a lot of that still is measurable. So you want to think about how those things work together, because the AI result on its own is good, but it's not going to be the only thing that creates credibility. It's going to be that combined with the other signals that you're sending across channels as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And so, Andrew, when I think about myself and how we're looking at it, we look at it from a silo, just what's affecting us. So you probably see a bunch of different streams because you're servicing several clients. Have you seen an overlay between all of them, or is there siloed between the different, whether it's a trading platform or a community bank or a savings bank? Can you talk to us about if there are differentiators and what you guys are doing in that perspective?
Sure. So we do see that different industries are being affected differently, but what's been very consistent is that part of that top of the funnel conversation is going away for most industries, because people are able to get that initial information around what is this, what are some initial pathways to finding solutions for it. So I think part of that is going away in terms of it's not something you can really count on. But then where we're shifting, instead of focusing on, all right, well, what are our impressions? It's more of, okay, what is our influence and our presence here? And then in terms of across, I guess, like different platforms in a way, is we do see differences in terms of like how Google has been performing over the past 16 months to 24 months in terms of the amount of impressions that we're seeing from an SEO perspective has been fluctuating quite a bit. Especially gets interesting when you start to look at what are more of those longer tail queries, where you can look in your search console and say, is our visibility for phrases that have 12 words or more? And these are types of things that lend themselves more to that higher, to that more language model, because it's a longer query, but sometimes it could be a bit more qualified in a way, and that allows us to get more hints into maybe where parts of the upper funnel are still up for grabs in terms of being able to have visibility there, and then kind of working backwards from there down the funnel.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So when you break down silos of the across paid, owned, and earned, right, in these cross channels, how do you align the story in governance when that comes into place, right? Specifically, I see for Trade Desk that we start getting different pieces pulled in from places. And the biggest thing for us is how do we stay FINRA compliant with these messages being pulled into the LLMs and we're not pulling in our disclosures. So can you talk to me, Matt, I'll present this question to you first. Can you talk to me a little bit about how our audience here can mitigate that when it comes to compliance and pulling in the different story?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should start off by acknowledging that this is not a new problem, right? We've been dealing with search engine results pages for years, and in terms of natural search at least, Google will pull into your results on the SERP what Google chooses to pull in, and there's some things you can do to influence that, but you can only influence it. You can't make that decision. So it's not a new problem. We've had to deal with this, and yeah, that creates confusion among current and prospective clients. They see a message, they come to the site, they don't necessarily see exactly what we're looking for. You then have a live conversation with them, and they have a preset notion of what the facts are, whether or not they truly are. And so I think this is where the human element comes in many ways, and I think it's making sure that from a content perspective, we are partnering with all of our other stakeholders, all of our other partners within our organization to make sure that it is as accurate and thorough and complete as possible. Having really detailed, frequently asked questions, that's come up a lot. It can help with that, but it won't solve all of that. And so then there's the training of all of our frontline client-facing people to, and I think it's two pieces. There's the EQ piece of this and the IQ piece of this. The IQ piece is making sure they're equipped with what the right facts actually are. I think that's something that most of us are probably quite good at, and our compliance and legal teams make sure that we're delivering the right facts in a clear and transparent way. I think the EQ piece of it is empathy, and understanding that even though this is not new, it's probably amplified now, and people are having these complete dialogues with AI engines. They're having a whole conversation, and they then come to you thinking that they are now the foremost expert in the question that they're asking, even though they're asking you for an answer. And so I think it's how can you, with empathy, pivot that conversation, express an understanding that, yes, I understand that this is the result you got from the chat engine. Sometimes they pull selective and sometimes even hallucinated information, but happy to share what's actually the truth here. If you have any concerns, we can have a dialogue about it. If the product you're asking about or the service you're asking about it no longer feels like the right fit, completely understand. We can have a chat about what other options are. So I think it's controlling what you can, making sure that it's clear, transparent, you have all the right disclosures in place and so on your site. Building it and operationalizing it that maximizes the chances that it gets picked up correctly, and then acknowledging that it won't, and having the empathy to handle those conversations as they come up.
Excellent. So I'm going to add a little caveat to that for you, Andrew. How do you handle when it comes to hallucinations, right? And those hallucinations kind of changing the public perception of not only how you're presenting that information, right, but changing the perception of your brand and obviously what is reality and what is not. So I'll present that to you as kind of a little twist in the question.
Yes, it certainly isn't new. Operating in silos within an organization can be very detrimental. We all know that has a lot of negative effects, and we've been dealing with that for decades. And so similar to, customers don't see distinguished channels. Obviously, they know if I'm on Facebook versus I'm on Google, but they don't really see channels the way that we see it. They don't understand business functions separately in terms of branding versus marketing versus product. And so AI doesn't see that either. It looks across all of it. It blends it together into something very concise, usually. And so as a result, everyone really has to co-govern brand. Now, of course, not everybody can own everything because then nothing really gets done if no one's really responsible or really leading it. And so what we've been seeing, especially related to in terms of identifying hallucinations or just maybe negative situations of brand sentiment, is having almost like, it's like this brand accuracy council. Sometimes our clients have an existing center of excellence, and we're able to leverage part of that foundation where they're already plugged into different parts of the business. And then some of our clients are still utilizing an iteration of AI task forces, which when this was all very new, kind of figuring out what's going on, and this is a newer iteration. But at the end of the day, it's a matter of, let's see what our brand is showing up for, how is it showing up across all of these platforms, And of course, that is way easier said than done. It is very hard to identify what are all of those prompts and likely prompts. We use a variety of different tools, as well as a proprietary tool that kind of pulls that all together to figure out what's going on across those different platforms. But you want to have that audit and see where do we show up and where is it accurate, where is it inaccurate, but where is it accurate but it's very negative? And then kind of reverse engineering, well, where does this information come from in an organization? Because everyone's putting out different content in different channels, and so you need to make sure that everyone's aligned on that. And a way to prevent hallucinations could be obviously doing the right things from a business perspective of having good experiences for customers, encouraging them to talk about it. But sometimes, in order for the LLMs to really understand what you are or what you aren't, you have to think about how do we define and really explain what our offerings are. So for example, marketing language comes up with beautiful things. Say for example, it could be like a payment provider in commerce, and we could say something that's beautiful in the sense of, we help entrepreneurs of tomorrow realize limitless possibilities in payments. It sounds great. A lot of people worked on that to put it together. We love it. It's beautiful. But that leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And you have to find a way to message that, but also say in a more direct way, maybe we are a cloud-based commerce platform that helps entrepreneurs process payments and manage inventory more effectively to scale their business. It's not sexy, but it tells you exactly what it is, and the LLMs are going to then be able to break down, okay, you process payments, you focus on entrepreneurship, it's more scalable, and that will help mitigate the amount of hallucinations because your brand is more better understood by these models. And I think, going back to the old idea, practice of just industrial organizational design, you would never want to structure a company to create friction for the customer's experience. You also would not want to organize your organization to create friction or allow for these negative mentions to scale across these LLMs.
I thought you were going to say that the AI picked up that you allow just limitless payments.
Yeah, too, right?
Because those words were in there, right? I like the brand truth council that you talked about. One of the things that we're actually talking about in our place is potentially a variation of that around, this goes back to what we were talking about, journey mapping and the client experience, is a client experience council that brings together all of the different stakeholders that face the client. Because as you say, they don't think about your different business lines. They don't care if you have one team manage or the in-branch retail experience versus the online experience. The worst thing you could ever say to a client is, oh, that's an online issue, I got to transfer you to that department. Right? You need to have a single face, and I think the advantage of trying to bring that together is it also brings in then a better understanding is what is that perceived brand truth? Because, right, we're talking about AI and AI hallucinations, but again, and we said that's not new. There were search engine results, but there are also reviews and social media, and before that there was word of mouth, and you can't control any of those things, right? So the question is, how do you understand what those are and then react in an appropriate kind of way to try to pivot back to the brand truth that you're trying to establish?
So in your organization, Matt, when we think about okay, who really owns brand truth at this point, and Andrew kind of said, everybody's got to be the governing party on that and bringing that in. Who do you see, where does that fall ultimately on shoulders of? I mean, ultimately, I feel like it falls on me, but everybody doesn't think like we do. And so within your organization, where does that really fall, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree that it has to be co-owned around the organization. I think everybody has to be bought into it and have a singular view of what is your brand story and how do the pieces fit together and how do they affect the experience. And thinking about what is experience even, right? Experience is the sum total of every touch point that your current and prospective clients have you across every channel, across every stage of their life cycle. That's a lot, and it touches all parts of your organization. So everybody needs to be bought into it. Yes, that's a great way to blow up any kind of RACI and have nobody actually be responsible for it. So, ultimately, yeah, I mean, of course, in my role, I believe as a marketer, we deal with our internal stakeholders and try to partner very closely with them. And I like to think that we try to co-own the P&L with them. We're also client-facing and prospective client-facing, and so I think that combination uniquely situates us to potentially be the hub at the center of that wheel. But I think that's a good model for it. I think a wheel doesn't work if it doesn't have a hub, but it also doesn't work if it doesn't have spokes in a rim. So you need to have all of those pieces. I think the marketing function can help to unify and pull it all together.
So this naturally kind of brings us into the next really topic of updating our measurement frameworks and how we look at all these pieces together. When tracking performance across a fragmented, privacy-first ecosystem, traditional attribution breaks down, right? And we talked about the black funnel earlier. Where do we look at that and how they fall into place together when you're talking about performance marketing and paid media, specifically paid?
Sure. So of course, measuring across a fragmented ecosystem where we're doing lots of different marketing, you have walled gardens across these platforms, that idea, that challenge isn't necessarily new. But obviously with this darker funnel, it's opaque in terms of what people are putting into it for a lot of it. And I think we're going to have to move away from, we've become so accustomed to and have relied on very precise attribution where we have different multi-click models and last attribution and shared attribution and all of those different models. But we're going to have to move more towards this combination of correlation and modeling influence. And so it requires a lot of tweaking. There isn't a silver bullet for it. There also isn't something that works universally across all organizations or all industries. And one thing that we've been working with some of our clients and has been really insightful is creating more of this, in addition to our normal reports and dashboards, coming up with this larger correlation dashboard set, where we look to see what are these types of metrics that we can measure, that, whether it's search impressions, it's media impressions, but then down to certain types of website traffic, non-digital if there's related to foot traffic, and also information that happens more so maybe within the CRM. And we can see what are these different trends we're seeing. Are there certain needles that we could thread through, but when we start to break that down into certain service lines, certain geographies, and figuring out, are there correlations from activities that we're doing over here that are affecting things over here? And that's been very interesting to see where there are correlations and sometimes there aren't. But it's something that I think is allowing us to figure out at the end of the day. It's more so not figuring out what is every single touch point and how to manage it, but it's more so looking at what are the right signals to focus on in order to prove that momentum and then being able to lean more into that.
Yeah, I think it's also being creative and proactively thoughtful about measurement. I think measurement 100% needs to be not something you do after everything is done. Measurement needs to be part of the design. And sometimes, especially as the funnel becomes a little bit darker, you have to be a little bit creative in terms of the forethought you're putting into that and how you do it. I'll give a quick example. Let me just ask, how many marketers here believe their marketing budget should be larger? Okay. How many marketers believe their marketing budget should be larger but have trouble making that case? Okay. So obviously, common problem, right? There's the old adage about, I know half my marketing spend is really effective. I just don't know which half. That doesn't fly anymore. I walked into my boardroom and I told our directors that doesn't fly, that shouldn't fly, and if I try to pull that shit, they should fire me. But that means being creative about how you measure. So, of course, I tried to make that case. I tried to make the case that our media penetration is so low and we should be doing so much more media spend across brand, across performance, across everything. And then, didn't get the budget increase that I wanted to do that across our entire footprint. So I can't spend at the levels that I believe we should everywhere. But what I can do is potentially spend at that right fully saturated level in a very micro kind of way. So we kind of introduced this idea of a paired market test. So a paired market test, for anybody who doesn't know, really developed by the big CPG firms, who historically weren't necessarily getting the register level and SKU level transactional data. They were trying to understand, as they spent marketing on razor blades or diapers or cola or whatever it was, how much are they moving the needle in terms of sales and market share? And so what they would be able to do, of course, their budget's much larger than mine, but they would be able to pick pairs of markets, in their case, usually at the metro or DMA level, and they pick pairs of markets that look very similar to one another, and they invest very heavily in whatever their marketing mix, whatever their media mix is in one of the member of that pair, and they hold out the other. And they do this in a couple of different pairs so they can gauge effectiveness in different markets. And they run that for a period of time. Then afterwards, they can look and they say, well, look, to the extent that we improved our sales and improved our market share in that exposed area, above and beyond whatever noise from the economic situation and everything else happening in the control, that spread, that difference, must have been attributable to the mix of marketing and media activities that we did. Now, it's not perfect. You're not able to see which specific activity drove which specific behavior, but it quantifies in a very specific way what that mix did. And that's what we've done within our footprint. Now, in our footprint, it's Clifton versus Kearney, New Jersey, not Atlanta versus another metropolitan area. But we can do the same idea. And we did that over several months. And we were able, and we did it with measurement as part of the design. So we implemented brand tracking, but we also implemented kind of a full assessment of business impact within those markets, deposits, loans, other specific behavior, service uptake. And what we were able to show was clear and decisive upticks, both on the brand metrics across the funnel, as well as the bottom of the funnel business impacts, which ultimately is what your chief financial officer is really going to care about, right? And not only were we able to prove that out, but when we proved it out and we showed him how much we lifted, he came back and said, okay, so you spent this much in those smaller markets and you got this much of a lift. And so if we were to generalize that and do that across the entire footprint, it would probably mean this much more spend, right? And this much more spend was what I had asked him for in the first place.
Yeah.
So, you can lead a horse to water if you design measurement the right way.
Thank you for that example. It was actually very insightful. So as our teams prepare for that movement, when customer consumption comes from AI rather than website, right, there are a few things that we're looking at. Emergent channels and AI, what is the new media frontier, integration and ownership, and I'm kind of putting it all together as we kind of wrap up here. Measurement and a dark funnel, and operational. So the key takeaways that for me had been AI being the media gatekeeper. The dark funnel is real. Top of funnel matters, right? Testing obviously matters at this point. So how are your teams preparing for that as a compass? And you kind of spoke to that, but I'll kind of turn the floor over to you guys to kind of wrap it all up into those three areas that we talked about. And what's the main message that our audience here can take away and obviously put into operation immediately, because it is a pain point for everybody as we sit here today of having a takeaway and something actionable to do when we get back to our desks.
You want to take it first?
So I think it's really important to start testing something somewhere. It can be very overwhelming of where to start with all of these changes, but trying to find maybe it's a certain part in your journey or maybe something that is a challenge for your brand in terms of acquisition or visibility, but just starting to test, how do we show up in these platforms or what do these journeys look like? And I think starting to test making tweaks to it and kind of reverse engineering, all right, well, this doesn't seem to be working that well in terms of where we're showing up or not showing up, and figuring out where to make those adjustments and tweak it. I think there's also been a lot of things, leading up to this, especially when you look at within media. You have Performance Max in Google, now they have the Search AI campaign, and we've been moving towards this dynamic, hey, give me your website and I will make all the ad copy, which we know is a compliance nightmare. And so I think finding ways to test things in a controlled environment and seeing what goes well, what doesn't go well, and just gradually expanding that is going to be really key in order to find success here, and doing things that have a clear objective and not trying to boil the ocean all at once.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add, I think there's a lot of conversations around, AI is this huge disruptor. It's scary. It's blowing everything up. And maybe there's certainly it's a disruptor, and maybe there's a little bit of what does that mean? I personally think it's a huge opportunity, and I think, especially for the smaller range of businesses, it democratizes reach. I think that if you are able to develop really good, rich content that's valuable and adds value against what people are looking for, on a search engine results page, when it's not giving you an answer, it's giving you 10 places, or as you flip through pages, 100 places where you could find the answer. That favors the brands that already have really great awareness. And you can go to the page that shows up very high that has a name you know. But now, if you are developing the best content, and it's content that's supported across your channels to generate signals that show authenticity and credibility, now you have access to that reach that you might not have been able to get before. So I think that's huge. I think that's tremendously important in terms of developing value-add content and using all of your channels, using paid, owned, earned together to unify that content, tell the story in a way that's appropriate for each of those channels, and really ultimately get the most out of that more democratic reach.
So as we kind of wrap it up today, and I think Matt kind of said it earlier, don't beat yourselves up. Like, today is day one, and I hope a lot of the insights that we were able to provide, or our panelists were able to provide, with you can take back to your teams and kind of see what works for you and what's most important, and piece that together. And we hope that we're able to provide a little insight more into the AI and search and visibility today. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.